Shive in the Department of Health Studies at East Stroudsburg University. In conjunction with the Lead Awareness Project, I'd like to present the leading 5 home hazards and ways that you can protect your family. If you look in the United States, the 5 leading home hazards include the highest, which is falls. That is the leading cause of death. Roughly about 6,000 people die a year from falls. Secondly is poisoning. That's our second leading cause of death. We have roughly about 5,000 people die annually of all types of poisoning. And then one that I want to talk about that often goes unnoticed is that of lead poisoning. In the United States, we have about 4 million households with children who are exposed to very high lead levels. And if you look at the statistics, we have roughly about 500,000 children ages 1 to 5 that have blood lead levels above 5 micrograms per deciliter. And that level of blood concentration is considered to be hazardous. We're also going to look at choking and suffocation. About 1,000 people die a year of that. Also drowning. We lose about 800 people a year from that. And so we're going to talk about these 5 leading household hazards and ways that you can protect your family. What are some things that you can do to try to avoid these as potential problems? Let's look at falls first. I said that falls are the leading cause of death in the United States as a household injury. We have about 2.4 million people who fall each year, but who do not die from it. Some sustain injuries that are severe enough that they carry those on for a lifetime. Others, they gradually recuperate. So about 2.4 million, they fall, but they don't die from it. Typically, these are older adults, although we can also have children as well. It is the leading cause of non-fatal injuries for all children, birth to 19 years of age, and roughly about 8,000 children are treated on a daily basis in U.S. emergency department and hospitals. How can you prevent falls among children? So we more or less have falls being a problem on both ends of the spectrum, for the very young and also for the old. Let's look at for children first. First of all, one of the biggest ways that children fall is when they're playing. So we want to make sure that children play safely. Playgrounds should be secure places. There should be surfaces that are safe, as soft as possible. Many parks are putting in special material that when children can fall on them, they won't have potential broken bones. They're soft and also well maintained. Oftentimes they use wood chips or sand. We try to avoid dirt and grass. Also, one way to prevent falls for children is to make your home safer. Use home safety devices like guards on windows. If you live in very tall buildings, high buildings, especially if you're able to open up the windows, we lose many children every summer when people open up the windows to get some air and the children fall out. You can put some window guards on the windows so they're less likely to fall. Put in stair gates, guardrails. All right. Also, keep sports safe. Make sure your child wears protective gear during sports and recreation. For example, if they're going to be using inline skates, make sure they're wearing all of the protective equipment on their elbows and their wrists and knees. Also, supervision is the key. Supervise young children at all times around places where there's potential hazards. Now, what about falls for the elderly? They're at the other spectrum of the age group. One of the things that's very important is that the elderly get some exercise. Sitting around and living a very sedentary lifestyle causes the muscles to atrophy, and they're actually more likely to fall. It can lead to weak legs if they don't get exercise. And if they do get exercise, even something simple like Tai Chi, it can increase muscle strength and improve balance, making it less likely that they'll fall. This is a big misnomer among the elderly. Many of them say, you know, just let me sit here, let me relax, I'll be less likely to fall. Well, actually, if they do that on a long-term basis, they're going to be more likely to fall because their muscles are weaker. Also, they need to be mindful of medications. Many of the medications or combinations of medications oftentimes cause the elderly to be lightheaded, more likely to fall. Also, help them keep their vision sharp. Make sure that their eyes are being checked on a regular basis, that they're wearing their glasses. It's more likely that they're going to be able to not fall if they're able to see clearly. Also, try to eliminate any hazards at home. About 50% of falls happen in the home for the elderly, and oftentimes there may be clutter or tripping hazards, things that are on the floor that might clutter, that might be in their way that they could trip over. This is also very important, especially nowadays, when oftentimes there's multiple generations in a household. So you might have kids that are playing with the toys and the elderly who could trip over those toys. Also, some steps that you can take to reduce falling among the elderly. You can remove things, as I said, that you could trip over, like papers, books, clothes, and shoes. Install handrails and lights on staircases, so again, they have a lighted way, they can see very clearly if they're using those. Remove small throw rugs, or use double-sided tape so that the rugs don't slip. Oftentimes the rugs move and then the elderly can fall as a result. Keep all items that you use often in cabinets and that can be easily reached without a step stool. Otherwise, they're going to potentially fall off the step stool. Have grab bars, especially next to tubs and showers or next to the toilet. Also, this is another place, showers are a big problem. Make sure that they have mats so that they don't slip, non-slip mats, especially in showers or places that can get wet surfaces like wet tile, for example. Again, generally you can improve lighting in your home, and the reason that's important is as people get older, they need brighter lights to be able to see. All right, and then also wear shoes both inside and outside the house. The bare feet and slippers can lead to more potential for falls. Another leading cause of death is that of fires and burns. Someone dies in the U.S. in a fire about every 3 hours. If you look, U.S. fire departments respond to about 1.2 million fires annually, and about 85% of all U.S. fires occur in homes. So this is a very important reason why it's a leading household injury, is that 85% of the fires actually occur in houses or homes. About 2,800 people die annually, and about another 13,000 are injured from fires. And most of the victims, they actually die from smoke inhalation and toxic gases before they're actually burned, if they're burned. All right. Also, smoking and cooking is the primary cause of residential fires. Some of the groups that are increased risk for fire-related injuries and death include children 4 and under, and also older adults 65 and older. So again, we see problems on both ends of the spectrum, the very young and also the elderly. All right. We also see there tend to be some more minorities that have problems with it. For example, African Americans and Native Americans. Also, poor Americans tend to have a more likelihood of having fires. And also people that are living in manufactured homes or substandard housing. I mean, it's a housing that's not very well taken care of. Right? About a third, close to almost 40% of home fire deaths occur in homes without smoke alarms. We'll see as a recommendation, one of the ways that you can reduce your risk of having a fire-related injury is to install smoke alarms. Many who die do not have them. Also, most residential fires occur during the winter months, and unfortunately, alcohol use contributes to an estimated 40% of residential fire deaths. Now, what can we do about preventing fires and people getting burned? One is never leave food unattended on a stove. I know that sounds like, sort of an old wise tale or a folklore, but it is true. Oftentimes you leave something on the stove and they're thinking, oh, I'll be right back. We forget about it and we forget it's there, and of course it's on too long and it ultimately could catch on fire. Keep cooking areas free of flammable objects such as pot holders and towels. Avoid wearing clothes with long, loose-fitting sleeves, especially when cooking. Never smoke in bed or leave burning cigarettes unattended. Do not empty smoldering ashes in a trash can, and keep ashtrays away from upholstered furniture and curtains. Also, never place portable space heaters near flammable materials like drapery. And keep all matches, lighters, and any implements that can cause flames away from children. Oftentimes kids, they're playing with matches, they drop them in a trash can, maybe they even start something small on fire, either accidentally or on purpose, and next thing you know, the whole house is burned. Install smoke alarms on every floor of the home, including the basement, and particularly near rooms in which people sleep. What a fire alarm does is when it detects fire, it detects it in advance of you being overcome by smoke, therefore giving you some time to get out of the building. All right. Also, you may install fire alarms, but you need to make sure that they are maintained. How many times has it been that you heard a fire alarm chirping, that meaning the battery's low, and you really aren't prepared to take care of it at that time, so you take it down, you dismantle it, and you never get around to putting a battery in it, and there the fire alarm lays, taken down, but there's no battery in it. All right? So they need to be maintained. One suggestion for helping with this is to have lithium-powered batteries. And also hush buttons, which allow people to stop false alarms quickly, especially if it's wired to some system. All right. Also, smoke alarms should be tested on a periodic basis. It's preferable to do that every month, but there should be some regular period of testing of these. Also, this is something that often is not done. Families should devise a means of getting out of the house. So if there is a fire, here's the way to get out of the house, and when you do get out of the house, where are we going to meet? So that way you know everyone's safe, that they made it out because there's a rendezvous place. All right? That should be, by the way, in any catastrophe that might happen, even something that's a natural disaster or something, some emergency situation. Do you have a place that you can meet with your family? All right? But definitely in a fire, there should be a place that you get together. And you should, by the way, practice that plan every 6 months if you can. Right? One of the things that's somewhat controversial, and there's been a lot of discussion lately, is should new homes have sprinkler systems built into it? There was a move to try to have that happen. Unfortunately, many people complained about the added cost that's happening now with that would be added to building a new house with them. So many municipalities have not mandated that yet, but if it's possible, it certainly would be worth having. All right. Drowning is another leading household injury. Drowning, roughly there's about 3,500 fatal unintentional drownings that are non-boating related. So we're not including boating accidents here, or people that drown from boating. Roughly 10 deaths per day, and about another additional 347 people die each year from drowning in boating-related accidents. Right? So we lose roughly about 4,000 people total for drowning. About 1 in 5 people who die from drowning are children 14 and younger. That's probably not a surprise to people. Oftentimes, especially young children, they'll wander by a swimming pool, they'll go to reach for something, and they'll topple in. All right? So for every child who dies from drowning, another 5 receive emergency department care for non-fatal submersion injuries. One of the things that we find is about 50% of drowning victims, they don't die, but they do need to go to the hospital, and they may be hospitalized for some time, and they may actually sustain some neurological damage as a result of it, right? Having the lack of oxygen. Who's at risk for drowning? Most drowning victims are males, about 80% of them. Children have the highest drowning rates, children ages 1 to 4. More than about 30% who have some kind of unintentional injury are actually dying from drowning. So 30% of unintentional injuries among children 1 to 4, it's drowning that's the problem. Also, some people ages 1 to 14 tend to die, are the second leading cause of death as unintentional injuries. Also, minorities, certain minority groups like African Americans, they tend to drown in swimming pools at much higher rates than other groups such as whites. How can you prevent drowning? One thing is, please make sure that children are supervised if they're going to be in pools and other bodies of water. There are also, one thing that you can use, when we say supervision, it's not just watching them, but it may be what's called touch supervision. In other words, adults can very easily get distracted, and it doesn't take too long for a kid to drown in water. So hold on to the kid. So when you're looking around, at least you can have, you're touching them, not just watching them with your eyes. All right? Do not get distracted by reading, playing cards, telephones, cell phones, mowing the lawn, all that kind of stuff. Also, I remember mowing the lawn is an interesting one. I remember when my son was getting a little older, like around 4 or 5, I would be mowing and he was playing in an enclosed area, so there were rails there, and there was a swimming pool. In other words, there were different levels on a deck, and then he had to go over another gate to get into the swimming pool area. And I remember I was mowing, keeping an eye on him because he was playing in the deck area, and I no sooner took one pass around the house, and he must have been to the age where he could get over that gate. And I couldn't believe, by the time I came around the house, I saw him crawling over the gate. All right? So we think we can, things can happen quickly, but they sure can. All right? So be a bit careful about your own distractions. Use the buddy system. Always swim with the buddy. That way somebody's looking out for somebody else. Also, be careful if, especially the child has any kind of seizure disorders, that they're wearing safety jackets, life jackets. Obviously, it helps if you teach your kid to learn how to swim. Even if it's when they fall in, they don't panic, and they learn to swim to the side and hold on, and then work their way over to the ladder. Some basic things. Also, it pays to learn CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. If somebody's in a drowning situation, or if somebody has some other kind of emergency like a heart attack or a cardiac arrest, what can you do for those people? Also, avoid alcohol. Many times drowning is related to alcohol consumption. Also, one other thing that sometimes happens as a sort of game, children like to hyperventilate, meaning they really inhale more oxygen than normal so that they can stay underwater for longer periods of time. The problem with that is physiologically, it can actually cause them to pass out and drown. All right, so there should be no hyperventilation kind of games that are played so the kids can, or anybody can stay under longer. Also, know your local weather conditions and forecasts before swimming. Obviously, there are some people that are electrocuted by lightning because they're in the water when the lightning storm comes. And then the other thing you can do is install four-sided fencing. There are special fences that have been developed for pool areas that make it very difficult for anybody to try to climb over and make it impossible not impossible always, but make it very difficult for people to get into the pool area when you don't want them there. Also, clear the pool and deck of toys. Remove all toys from the pool and surrounding area immediately after use so children are not tempted to go into the pool area and utilize those toys. All right? If you are in and around natural water areas that would include ponds and rivers and places like that, always make sure that the participants have U.S. Coast Guard approved life jackets and know the meaning of and obey the warnings represented by the colored beach flags. If it's a beach area, you'll see various flags. You should know what those mean. Also, watch for dangerous waves and signs of rip currents. For example, water that's discolored and choppy, foamy, and moving in a channel away from the shore. If you're caught in a rip current, swim parallel to the shore. All right, so oftentimes we want to fight against the current. You're utilizing energy that's going to be wasted because you can't swim against the current. You should swim parallel to the shore and try to get into the shore as you go down the rip current. Another leading cause of death is that of choking and suffocation. Unintentional suffocation, which includes strangulation and choking, kills roughly about 1,200 kids a year. Most of these, about 77%, are less than 1 year old. For example, some years, 22,000 children are treated in emergency departments for non-fatal unintentional suffocation. 1/3 of these children are less than 1 year of age. So most infant suffocation and death injuries occur as a result of unsafe sleeping environments. This is one area where there's a lot of study being done, and now we're putting infants into bassinets and cribs, but there's nothing else that should be in the crib. Not even covers, so that they can get entangled in the covers. Now they're put in clothing that's going to keep them warm, but there isn't anything that they could potentially cause them suffocation. Also, older children may have suffocation, entrapment, or strangulation incidents on playground equipment. Many of these risks, though, they are predictable and very preventable. All right? What are some of the things you can do to prevent child suffocation? One is create a safe sleeping environment. Place infants on their backs on a firm surface every time they're laid down for sleep. The safest place for infants to sleep is in a crib or a bassinet, not in the same bed as parents. Keep soft objects like stuffed animals, blankets, and loose bedding out of the cribs, and do not put objects such as mobiles above the cribs. Also, stay safe during the meal and playtime. Cut or break age-appropriate food into small bite-sized pizzas. Always supervise infants or young children during mealtime. One of the problems with choking and suffocation is it's the silent killer. So a kid might be eating, starts choking, they can't make any sound. Of course, we're talking here especially about infants that may not be speaking anyway. But there isn't a sound, and it's very silent, and then you turn around and there the kid is slumped over. Right? So really make sure that you supervise anytime children are eating and when you're feeding them. All right? Encourage children to chew their food thoroughly and to swallow it before talking or laughing. Also, children should not eat while playing or running. All right? And again, another recommendation is to learn first aid and CPR. Oftentimes, as much as we want to avoid problems, injuries still occur. And if they do, we want to know what to do to be able to address it. What I want to look at next is poisoning. poisoning is the second leading cause of death, and every day in the United States, over 300 children ages birth to 19 are treated in an emergency department, and 2 children die as a result of being chemically poisoned. And by the way, this is after we have installed, today, of course, we have the child-proof caps. We used to lose a lot more children before we had the child-proof caps. So even with those, it is our second leading cause of death in the homes, cause of injuries. All right, what's some recommendations to try to prevent chemical poisoning? This is poisoning in general through chemicals. One is lock the chemicals up. Keep medicines, toxic products, cleaning solutions in their original packaging where children cannot see them or get to them. So lock them up. If you have children temporarily, meaning in a couple years they'll be grown up and so forth, and you do not want to put permanent locks on things, there are some temporary locks that you can put, but certain chemicals really should be locked up so that nobody can get into them. Also be careful of products not thought of as poisons. For example, things like vitamins, laundry and dishwasher detergent, especially the pods, or any type of detergent. Pest and rodent baits, disinfectants, fertilizers, weed killers, insect repellent, cosmetics, toilet bowl cleaner, kerosene, gasoline, and even things like golf balls. Golf balls, you say, well, they could choke on them, but what do we have to be concerned about with regards to chemical poisoning from golf balls? Well, when you think about it, sometimes people are very careless. They put their clubs in their golf bag in the closet. Maybe where the balls are, the bag's a little open. The door is open to the closet. The kids see the balls in there. They walk in, pick up the ball, lick the ball, and now they're poisoned. And you say, poisoned? Can you imagine the things that golf balls are exposed to? Pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers. And then we go and clean the ball with some kind of detergent. So the amount of chemicals that the ball has on it could potentially, especially for younger children, cause poisoning. All right? They say know the number. The national number for the Poison Control Center is 800-222-1222. I wish they were all twos. All right? But the National Poison Control Center, especially if you know what the chemical is that the person was exposed to, they should have the latest in terms of treatment. All right? By the way, you might say, well, I'm sure the labels on the chemical product will also have that treatment. Unfortunately, they're not always so accurate. So if you know what the chemical is, please call the Poison Control Center. They should have the latest treatment for that. Read the labels, especially regarding any kind of warnings about use of the product. And then safely dispose of any unused, unneeded, or expired prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, vitamins, supplements, and any medications. So anything that's expired and you're not going to be using, dispose of those. Do not have them laying around the house. Oftentimes, we just sort of have a little left of a medication, stick it in the linen closet or the medicine cabinet, forget it, it's there, we just keep buying new. As part of the overall context of poisoning, one pernicious type of poisoning is called lead poisoning. Oftentimes, it's not something that we recognize to be a problem. In fact, it's something that oftentimes goes unseen in houses and homes. The leading cause of problems are homes built before 1978, after which point it was mandated that lead no longer was allowed to be in paints. So many older homes, they still have layers of paint, of which the newest may not have lead in it, but previous layers do have lead in it. And so I want to talk about what is the nature of this problem and what are some things that you can protect yourself with. This is also of concern, especially to renters and landlords. there are some rules that are required for landlords to provide disclosure statements and for renters to at least be aware that they might be potentially exposed to lead in the home. So I'd like to talk about this pernicious issue here. Okay, so what I want to talk about, well, what is lead? What are the dangers of lead? Some issues related to disclosure. Also, protecting your family from lead in your home. There's a pamphlet that will talk about lead, ways that you might be able to remediate it or at least prevent some harm from it, and some ways to avoid it. All right? And then some fact sheets, and again, some examples of disclosure forms. All right? First of all, what is lead? Lead is a heavy metal that occurs naturally in the Earth's crust, but with human activities such as mining, burning of fossil fuels, and manufacturing, it has become somewhat widespread. Lead was also once a key ingredient in paint, gasoline, and is still used in batteries, solder pipes, pottery, roofing materials, and some cosmetics. One of the great achievements of public health, if you will, and of some regulations was the removal of lead from gasoline. I say it was a success story because the public health department was monitoring, the federal government was monitoring blood lead levels of people over the years, and when they finally banned lead in gasolines, what we've been noticing, especially among adults, is that the blood lead levels have been gradually going down. So I say it's a big success story. The problem is we still have high exposure levels among children because of these other ways that and products that they're being exposed to. So where is lead found? I mentioned some products that it's found in. It has been in paint and pigments, water pipes. It's rarely found in source water, but it enters the tap water through corrosion of plumbing materials. Homes that were built before 1986 are more likely to have lead pipes, fixtures, and solder, or they may not have lead pipes, but they may have, where they're soldered together, there might be some lead. All right? The most common problem is with brass or chrome-plated brass faucets and fixtures, which can leach significant amounts of lead into the water, especially hot water. So the hotter the water is, it's more likely that lead will leach from the pipes or from these materials into the water. It can also be found in canned goods, soil, household dust, especially if the paint starts peeling. This is one of the highest exposures that kids get, especially around windowsills in certain places in the home. If the paint is peeling, that can start breaking down, or it's even worse if they start putting paint chips in their mouth and that type of exposure. So one of the major problems is the dust that's created from peeling paint in older homes. Cosmetics, pottery, toys, some toys, especially in some countries that may still have some lead-based paints, may inadvertently make its way on the toys. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, have found that more than 24 million homes in the U.S. have lead-based paint, and when children are exposed to lead, they're often at risk for getting learning disabilities, behavioral problems, seizures, comas, and even death. In other words, what lead does to the human body, and it's more extensive in children because they're smaller and their levels may be higher relative to body weight and so forth. It usually causes some kind of neurological damage. So that as a result, they have problems thinking, they may have learning disabilities and other problems. I should point out here, though, that obviously kids can have those problems for other reasons. All right. However, if they are exposed to lead and their blood lead levels are high, they could have these problems due to that. There are various fact sheets that the federal government has prepared. There's one here that I have for you that's put out by the HUD and also the EPA. They talk about protecting their children from lead-based poisoning. They talk about it being in the home, as I just mentioned. And they also talk about people who are renters, their rights in knowing that they might potentially be exposed to lead. So in any homes previous to 1978, the people should get a lead disclosure that they should sign, indicating that they know that lead may be present in the house, all right, or is present in the house. And there's some requirements here. It includes that sellers and landlords must disclose known lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards and provide available reports to buyers or renters. Also, that sellers and landlords must give buyers and renters the pamphlet that's put out by the EPA and HUD that's called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And I'm going to share with you at the end of this presentation some resource that you can go and find that. Also, home buyers are supposed to get a 10-day period to conduct a lead-based paint inspection or risk assessment at their own expense. The rule gives the two parties flexibility to negotiate key terms of the evaluation. Also, sales contracts and leasing agreements must include certain notification and disclosure language. Sellers, lessors, and real estate agents share responsibility for the compliance with these regulations by the EPA and HUD. All right? Now, what is not required as a result of the law, all right, for tenants and landlords and so forth? First of all, the rule does not require that any testing or removal of lead-based paint be done by the sellers or the landlords. So it's not required that you remove it. Also, this rule does not invalidate leasing and sales contracts that are already in existence. If somebody does remediate, meaning try to remove the lead that's in the house, in other words, they want to scrape off all the paint, you really need to hire somebody that knows what they're doing in terms of being able to protect themselves. You don't want to remove all the paint and cause a lot of dust, lead dust to go into the air, which you then breathe in. So somebody really should be hired that knows how to do lead remediation so that they can do it in a very safe way and that you don't end up with a lot of lead exposure in other rooms and so forth. All right? All right, so this disclosure regulation then, it applies to pre-1978 housing for sale or lease, any public and privately owned housing, and it requires, as I said, this free educational pamphlet, a warning statement in the contract, disclosure of known lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards, all available information about it, and also provide an opportunity for testing. If somebody is a landlord, there are standard disclosure forms that are available that you can use for housing rentals. And also, if you're a renter, you should be getting these forms that make you aware of it. Oftentimes, you'll get the form, even if it's a post-1978 housing unit, but they'll check the box and saying it does not, it was built after 1978, so you're aware of that. All right. Again, there are various forms out here. Here's a standard type of form. There are some exemptions to the lead-based disclosures regulations. One is any post-1977 housing, as I said. These zero-bedroom units where the residential dwelling, the living areas are not separated from the sleeping areas. Any housing that's exclusively for the elderly or disabled. Property that's certified as lead-based paint-free. Property where the lead-based paint was removed. All right, so if it's worth the expense to the owner, they may have had the lead base removed, and now you don't have to worry about it. All right. Any unoccupied property pending demolition where it's going to be torn down, any non-residential part of property, so it's being used for something else, not living, and any rehabilitation or maintenance activities that do not disturb painted surfaces. Also, any kind of emergency kind of actions that may need to take place. All right. Here's the pamphlet that's entitled "Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home." I won't go through all of these. It's like at least 14 pages or so, but it tells you all of the situation about your rights related to lead-based paint, but also some simple steps that you can take to protect your family. All right, let me give you some examples here. All right, they say this: do not remove the lead-based paint yourself. Always keep the painted surfaces in good condition to minimize deterioration. Get your home checked for lead hazards. You might want to have a certified inspector take a look at it. Talk to your landlord about fixing surfaces with peeling or chipping paint. So if you're in a pre-1978 home and you're renting and you see peeling paint, talk to your landlord to see if either you can paint it or the landlord will paint it. Regularly clean floors, windowsills, and other surfaces. Why? Because if you get some dust on the floor, if you clean those up, then kids will not get it onto their skin and will not be as exposed to it. Take precautions to avoid exposure to lead dust when remodeling. When renovating, repairing, or painting, hire only an EPA or state-approved lead-safe certified renovation firm. Before buying, renting, or renovating your home, have it checked for lead-based paint. Consult your healthcare provider about testing your children for lead. Your pediatrician can check for lead with a simple blood test. This is something I really want to encourage people to think about. If you have a child 1 to 5, ask your pediatrician to give them a simple blood test to check what their blood levels are, especially if you're living in a house that's pre-1978. It'll enable you to have a little peace of mind in knowing that if they don't have high blood levels, even if the pain is there, obviously they're not getting much exposure to it, at least that way. All right. It also would mean they're not getting exposed to it in other ways, right? So a blood test will be a good indicator of how they're doing. Also, wash children's hands, bottles, pacifiers, and toys often. Make sure that's a good practice anyway. For other reasons, such as bacteria. Make sure that children avoid fatty foods and eat nutritious meals high in iron and calcium. This helps deal with any lead that might be in the blood. There's relationships between, binding and things like that, that if you have adequate iron and calcium, it'll help mitigate lead exposure. And then remove shoes or wipe soil off the shoes before entering your house. In addition to lead being found in peeling paint, paint chips, and dust, lead can be found other places. For example, it can be found in soil. This can be a problem if children play, especially in bare soil where the lead is present. It can also be brought home from certain occupations, so people should be careful if you're working in factories or places where lead may be getting on clothing. You may actually be bringing it into the house. So you can be exposed to lead other than just through paint. So this pamphlet gives you a lot of good suggestions, tells you about lead exposure, what's the potential harm for it, as well as some ways that you can mitigate or reduce the potential harm done by lead. Another place that you can go, it's called PAHousingSearch.com. This database for all landlords and sellers can be used to indicate whether or not a property is lead safe or lead free, but it really does not substitute for full requirements of the disclosure rule. All right, but you can go here to pahousingsearch.com and it'll give you some information on whether houses have lead or not. All right. Okay. So what are some recommendations then that you can do, or we suggest that you think about regarding potential lead exposure in the home? One is, if you suspect you may have lead paint in your home, get advice on safe removal from the housing or urban development. Someplace that really knows how to deal with the lead issue, if you want to remove it. Secondly, do not remove the lead yourself. Keep your home as dust-free as possible. Have everyone wash their hands before eating. Again, it'll get any kind of dust off the hands. Throw out any old painted toys if you do not know whether the paint contains lead or not. And as I said, please consider getting children tested, especially those first 5 years of life, but even beyond if you think there might be potential lead exposure for the kids. If your water has tested high in lead, consider installing an effective filtering device or switch to bottled water for drinking and cooking. Again, don't assume that your water has lead in it. Get a test and you'll be able to know whether it does or not. Clean the floor, windowsills, and door frames with a solution of powdered automatic dishwashing detergent, trisodium phosphate detergent, or lead-specific cleaning products. Teach children not to eat sand, dirt, and paint chips, or to play in grassy areas outside. Also, avoid any kind of canned goods from foreign countries until a ban on lead-soldered cans goes into effect. This is one of the problems. We have some foreign countries that are using lead-based solder for canned goods. Do not store wine, spirits, or vinegar-based salad dressings in lead crystal decanters for long periods of time, because lead can get into the liquid if there's lead in the decanters. Again, these are containers that are made with lead. A balanced, it could be certain types of products that have that in. A balanced diet that includes adequate levels of vitamin C, iron, zinc, and calcium, and phosphorus can reduce or prevent lead absorption. So it reduces the amount of lead absorbed into the body. Cover old paint, meaning on the walls. If the paint is on tight without many chips forming or peeling, you can paint over it. You can also use paneling, drywall, and encapsulation, which is similar to a very thick coat of paint. Also, wear protective equipment and clothing on any jobs that you do where you might be exposed to lead. Jobs or hobbies of lead exposure may bring some home. Places like shooting ranges, stained glass, construction, auto and radiator repairs. Some artists, things that they use have lead in it. Battery and glass manufacturers, lead smelters, painters, plumbers, and others. When you come home, make sure you change your clothes, take a shower, wash your hair. Even if you can do it before you come home, before leaving your job, that would be helpful. Do not shake out work clothes or wash them with other clothes, and use only cold water for cooking or drinking. Hot water is likely to have higher levels of lead than cold in older homes built before 1986. And if you rent, contact your landlord, especially if you see peeling paint and things that may be able to be taken care of that will reduce your exposure to lead. Also, just a reminder of the disclosure statements. Violating the lead disclosure rules may result in civil or criminal penalties. And also, real estate agents, landlords, or sellers may be fined up to $10,000 per violation, or costs of up to 3 times the amounts of damages to the tenants or the buyers. All right. Oftentimes, the problem is not the real estate agents. They're pretty much following the law with the disclosures, but the biggest problem is oftentimes landlords, they just may ignore it. They really don't know a lot about it. And so as a result, they're not giving the disclosure statements. And then finally, some resources here. We have the regional lead contacts, the HUD lead office, the National Lead Information Clearinghouse. Also, we've established a web address here at East Stroudsburg University. It's quantum.esu.edu/leadawareness. Also, we have the CDC and the Pennsylvania State website that addresses lead. So these are the leading 5 household injuries that are called household hazards that cause some fatalities, but also a lot of people to be injured. Of these 5 leading household injuries, one of them is poisoning, its second leading cause of injury. And as I just stated, one of the pernicious types of poisoning is something that you really oftentimes don't think about. You really don't see it. It's basically in paint, especially that's peeling, may be found in other products that have been acquired either through foreign countries or as a result of work, depending on what the work site is that the person engages in. So please consider these. These do not have to lead to fatalities, deaths, and injuries if we take the proper precaution and try to prevent these 5 leading causes of death and injury in homes.